Hi, thanks for joining us today for the Odgers Berndtson One Question series. I'm Jules McKean. I head up the media practice for Odgers Berndtson Executive Search out of London. I'm very happy to be joined today by Peter Fule. Peter, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Peter's a marketing executive who's worked in the last decade in European leadership roles at HBO and Google. He started out as a musician and has tried to be in the intersection of creativity, technology and business ever since. He holds an MBA from Copenhagen Business School and spent many years leading agencies and helping clients like H&M and the Swedish government with strategy and communications. Peter, it's brilliant to have you today. Where are you speaking to us from?
From my home in Malmö. So I'm actually in the music room where I try to get my sons to play a lot of music.
I can see it in the background. That's very nice, very inspirational. So in terms of I'm sure we'll probably end up talking about intersections of creativity and all sorts of things that have happened through the pandemic. But in your view, the one question is, what do you think, if anything, our industry has learned from the pandemic?
Well, it has learned a lot of things. I think it has changed our industry and there's no going back. So I think the pandemic fast forward the evolution of media and internet by maybe 3 or 5 years in 1 year. And I think some of the main shifts were around that we found out that we can do a lot of things online that we didn't think about. So we can learn online, we can get entertainment online in new ways, we can shop, and we can do a lot of things, and not only the early adopters, but also sort of the vast majority. So my parents learned that they can do a lot of things online. Yeah. And I think the second thing is that we found out that people are willing to pay for that if it's good quality. So if they get entertained or really can learn something online, they're ready to pay for that. And I think sort of e-commerce and shopping was the front runner for this, but in the sort of wake of that comes a lot of new and innovative services. And I think this is a really inspiring time to be in. Of course, it is disruptive and some businesses will suffer from it, but many new are coming in the wake of that. And there's no going back from that. So I think this is a really interesting time to be in if you're interested in the media and entertainment.
And it's interesting, isn't it? Because at the beginning of the pandemic, it seemed like there was some, particularly in publishing, there was some companies who kind of got past the breakers in creating this tech stack, starting to do subscription models, testing and learning on what their kind of monetization would be for kind of direct subscriptions beyond the print. And there was some who kind of had to desperately scramble to kind of skill up. Do you kind of see that kind of at some stage there might be a kind of cap on what people are prepared to pay for subscriptions, or are people going to go through sort of a process now of looking at all the things they're paying out for online and working out what they really want to do online and what they really want to do offline? Because I can see that reckoning coming at some stage. Yeah,
I think so. But I think what I see now is previously it was only the big companies, the big publishers that were sort of privileged to getting paid online, and have these subscription walls. And now it's a lot of smaller companies that experiment with new business models and pay for like microtransactions or different tiering in their content and how to getting paid for that. And I think this is something that I've only seen in the past couple of years. But I also think you're right that there is a limit to how many of those microtransactions or subscriptions you can have, right? You can probably have 5, 10, 15, but maybe not 50. So at some point in time, you will have to start figuring out what are you actually paying for and how can we sort of get an overview of that and stop it from escalating. Yeah.
It's interesting, isn't it, that some of those models have, for example, if you subscribe to a Substack, it's cutting out the middleman, isn't it? And I wonder if there is something about trust during the pandemic that, a kind of concern about fake news, who do you actually trust? And people gravitating towards individuals, as they do in sport, individuals, players, rather than teams. Maybe that's happening in editorial and even perhaps in content, going to kind of the providers of it that are the type of people that you trust and believe in. I don't know if you agree.
Yeah, I think so. And I think if you look at the younger demographic, that's what they're doing, right? They're subscribing to one individual who they trust and want to hear from, not a big publishing company or so. I think we in other generations also see some of that evolution. You know, that there's certain people that we want to follow that can be writers or creators of different kinds, and we're ready to pay them to service that content.
And do you think there are going to be any kind of really big winners coming out of this? It sounds terrible to even talk about winning of something that killed so many people, but in terms of actually teaching us how we can kind of interact in a different way. I mean, apart from the obvious with Zoom, the way in which, you've obviously been at HBO and you've been at Google, so presumably observing the way in which people consume content, share it with friends. Are there kind of things that we should be watching out for coming down the track that are just really interesting ways in which audiences have shifted in this last year?
I think there are many. I mean, I think that the field of education that has really been disrupted, and a lot of our children have been forced to sit home, and some have been exposed to terrible online education, while some have been really exposed to even better than they were before. So I think the field of education is definitely disrupting, and there's a lot of winners there if we can crack it, if we can make education better for our kids, and I think online can play a big part in that. So I'm really excited about to see what comes up there. But I think there are also new industries or niches coming up. I know we talked at one point about esports, and I think that is rapidly growing, and that will definitely be a category that is a winner and that people will pay for in the future. So new categories are coming up and all are getting disrupted. And as you say, it's for the companies that strikes and the jobs getting lost, that's terrible, of course. But I think this is inevitable, and sort of what we see now is just a fast forward of that evolution that would have happened eventually anyway.
It's because esports is obviously an incredibly dynamic and fast-changing growth story, but I also observe that gaming kind of generally is becoming it's just content and films that you live in, isn't it? In some cases, the narratives are so complex and so incredible. I saw a trailer for a game the other day, and it was like a James Bond trailer. Incredible graphics, really high end, not just shoot 'em up kind of game. And do you think there is a sort of, it needs to be a generational shift for people our age, doesn't there, to understand that actually the future of consuming content in the evening isn't going to be a binary decision of whether you watch something on Netflix or the BBC. It's going to be, are you immersing in a world or you're observing a world? And I don't know, that's just my supposition, Peter, and I might be wrong, but it's super interesting, isn't it, the development in there?
Yeah, definitely. And who are you going to immerse with, and what character will you be in that? So there's a lot of new questions that you'll have to pose in the evening. And sometimes I think we will have both, right? Sometimes you just want to turn something on and be entertained and not be forced to take a lot of decisions and participate. But the gaming is exploding, and I'm just trying to keep up looking at what my kids do, and it's fascinating, and it's in so many ways much more developing their skills and their social abilities than watching linear content. So
it's sort of almost like the competitive landscape of the share of attention is going to be a very different competitive landscape for broadcasters as they go forward, including things like that. And my son watches Netflix inside VR with his friends in a sort of Colorado mountain cabin, which is occasionally, and that sort of fusion of the kind of online and kind of viewed content is sort of crazy innovative. What if you look back at all of the stuff that we've kind of learned then for the last 14 months, do you think there's one thing that we're, because we could obviously throw out the baby with the bathwater and go back to the way things were and all go back into the office and things. is there one thing that you really hope that we'll keep going with, that we'll cling on to, that we've learned?
I think it's not specific for our industry, but this way of working remotely and working flexibly and from home, I think there are huge benefits of that. And I mean, very quickly saw companies adapting to this within weeks, and everybody being working from home. And this opens up huge possibilities, but also huge problems or difficulties that we have to deal with, right? It's this flexibility and being able to just control your work can be not for everybody. And I think it's for people who maybe are not comfortable with that total flexibility. It can be a burden, and also the sort of lack of social interaction has shone a light on a huge problem in the workforce about mental well-being. So I think this is something that, that problem was there before the pandemic, but now it has become really apparent. So that's something that I hope we learn how to deal with, and that employers will take a greater responsibility for mental well-being, and that will find new ways of working that is a mix between working remotely and working, meeting up in the office when or at any other place when that's more appropriate, of being more flexible both as a manager but as a company to different working styles that people have and their needs. Some people really like this, and we should allow them to be, work when they want and from their laptop in a cafe, and some don't and are not productive or happy in that environment. So that still needs to be solved, but I don't think we can go back to what has been. I still see that as a positive. We're still struggling with how to solve it, but I think we will, and I think it will be better than it was before.
Yes, I think that's definitely true. Now, that's brilliant. Thank you, Peter. Thanks very much for joining us on the Odgers Berndtson One Question. Lots of thinking to be done around how we get back into the office and watching this space on subscription models and on gaming and esports. It's going to be interesting to see where we are this time next year.
Definitely. We'll have to catch up then and see if we were right.
Exactly. Spring next year. Thanks, Peter. Speak to you soon. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.